from Geography and Planning at the University of Liverpool. We're very excited to have you, Todd. Please introduce yourself as we
Yeah,
suggest.
yeah. Okay, so I'm Todd. I'm a second year M-Plan Town and Regional Planning student here at the Uni of Liverpool. I've always kind of been just interested in kind of active travel and urban design, actually. I know Stephanie's here, and it was actually, it was the urban design module with her. Actually, that was introducing us to 3D modeling, and that's part of the reason I'm here. Actually, that got me interested in doing 3D models and visualizing, how our streets and spaces can be a bit different. So I've got a few kind of designs that I've made. If you've seen the Echo article, you might have seen them. I'm going to just kind of show the kind of principles behind them, and generally, my thoughts. It's not especially scientific, but it's my thoughts on what makes a good street, what makes a safe street in particular as well. Seeing as I'm doing this for the Risk Institute, I'm going to focus it more on the kind of safety aspect. But if I start, you'll see these are the three things I really want to focus on, which is the kind of casualties, killed and seriously injured people, the perception of danger. And I think that's an important thing as well. It's not just about making a safe place, it's about making a place where people feel safe as well. So, they feel more comfortable. And then also air pollution and physical activity, because if you've got an unattractive kind of car dominated, really scary environment, you're probably not going to want to walk or cycle all the time. And then you're going to drive more, which kind of exacerbates the problem. And just to the right here as well, here's a, so I think, Liverpool's the worst kind of metropolitan borough in Great Britain, in terms of killed and seriously injured pedestrians, which it's not a nice title to have, I don't think. So, obviously this isn't just for Liverpool, it kind of applies everywhere, but obviously my designs are in Liverpool, and I do think there is a real need to kind of have some kind of change to make the streets a bit safer. But not just, as I'll start talking about, it's not just about making it physically safe, it's about making it a nicer environment so people feel safe as well. The hierarchy of controls, this is something, I think workplaces, I think this is where it's used most of the time. So, you might be in some kind of engineering firm, and they use this kind of hierarchy of controls to kind of mitigate risks. And I think it's quite good actually to apply this to a kind of a road or kind of a street layout. So you'll see on the top, you've got the most effective, which is elimination. And then at the bottom, you've got PPE, which is the least effective, essentially. So in terms of roads, elimination is basically eliminating the threat. And the threat is almost exclusively motor vehicles, especially buses, trucks, if they're heaviest vehicles, obviously, but also, fast moving traffic. So private cars as well, but if they're moving quickly, of course, they're a huge danger to people walking, people cycling, people in wheelchairs, the general street users, so to speak. And there's one thing I'm not the biggest fan of. We'll always say kind of vulnerable road users need to be protected. Vulnerable road users is like cyclists, pedestrians, disabled people, wheelchairs or mobility scooters. And I think it's, maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like it's a little bit victim blaming to say, oh, they're vulnerable, they need to be protected, because you're putting the onus on them. Whereas I think we need to kind of accept that there's dangerous road users, and those are, heavy vehicles moving at high speeds. And I think we should be putting more the onus, on heavy vehicles that are moving quickly, because that's the threat. And that's the threat that kind of needs to be controlled to make a place safer, rather than telling pedestrians, whatever, you need to be protected. Obviously, it goes both ways, but I do think, we need to look at it from a slightly different view. So yeah, the first one is elimination. So I guess the best way would be removing traffic, or reducing it at least. But that's often not possible. So you couldn't just get rid of cars everywhere. So there might be, somewhere you can move it a bit better. For example, Bold Street, I'll take that example in Liverpool. You don't really need to have traffic moving down that street. It's not before it was kind of temporarily pedestrianised, it wasn't a through road anyway. But you can imagine if Bold Street was a through road, you've got huge numbers of pedestrians there. It's just not going to work well. It's not going to be safe because you've got a huge difference in speed between vehicles and pedestrians, a huge difference in mass, obviously. And you've got people crossing the road all the time. It's just not going to work. So it might make sense then to move the traffic somewhere where there's less pedestrian footfall, or there's kind of less built up area, so you're not going to be expecting people. But another way to do it is calming traffic speeds and volumes, pretty much to the extent that there isn't really a risk, which I think in the UK I don't know, perhaps it's not that common, I don't think. If you go to like Greece or Italy or Spain, you'll see kind of like small medieval towns, and you'll see the roads kind of 1.8 meters wide or something really narrow, and cars can only just get through them. And because of that, they have to drive really slowly. So they're pretty much going at walking pace. So obviously there's less danger. In the UK, you'll sometimes get shared spaces, I think to varying degrees of success. There's one quite famous one in London called Exhibition Road, which is just outside the Natural History and the Science Museum in Kensington and Chelsea. And it's been quite famous now for pretty much just for not working, because the whole idea was that there's no kind of priority. There's no kind of signed priority. So people kind of work it out themselves. But because it's still a big wide road, the kind of priority is assumed to the drivers, because they see a big wide space, open space. So it's easy for them to just drive straight down. So I do think shared space is a great tool. You'll see in the bottom left, if I go back, this is in Chester. And it's probably quite hard to see, but it's actually a bus route going through there. But because it doesn't really look like one, the buses generally drive pretty slowly. It's not perfect. I do think you want some slight indication that there will be vehicles there. But, that's a design thing. The kind of principle about shared space, I think, is quite good. And then another example, just on the right, this is my hometown. There's a ring road going pretty much the whole way around the town. And essentially what that allows is for most traffic just to bypass the town centre, because they pedestrianised the high street in the town. And before it was a really busy kind of through road, but most of the traffic is not serving any purpose to the town, to Hucknall. It's just going through, so it's kind of just leaching off the town. So by diverting the traffic away from the area where, you want people to be in the town centre, then it's kind of removing the threat essentially. And if you're removing all these motor vehicles, you're removing the chance that there's going to be an injury or a fatality. The second most effective way in terms of hierarchy of controls is substitution. So that's kind of the idea. Can we change the way people are moving from a motor vehicle, which is, the most dangerous way effectively, to a different mode of transport? And I think that's probably, you could say that's a kind of a policy, maybe, that should be done on a national or at least on a local level. It's not kind of the street design, but I do think there is there is ways that the redesigned street can actually induce the change. For example, if you've got bus lanes, it's going to prevent the chance that buses are going to be caught in traffic as much, and that's going to speed the buses up. And if the buses are quicker, they're going to be more competitive with driving, even though they've got to stop, multiple times to pick up passengers. And, there might be some people who think, oh, the bus is quicker now, so maybe I'm not going to drive for this certain trip. And the same thing as well with, cycle lanes, protected cycle lanes especially. Because if you've got, if before you only had the option to drive, or you had the option of a slow bus route, if all of a sudden you've got, for your journey, you've got a protected cycle lane, even if you've not cycled before, you might know that's an option now. So you've got the possibility to do it. And not everyone will, but some people will. And, once a few people have done it, then you have a few less cars on the road, which, is a few less chances that there's going to be a fatality, because it's a much more dangerous vehicle, obviously. So I think, yeah, there's quite a good way that substitution can kind of be promoted by changing the way the streets work, which is what I do in a lot of my designs. Essentially, I'm providing an option for everyone, giving them a walking space, a cycling space, a driving space if needed, a bus space preferably as well, depending on the size and the width of the road. But also you've got to make it enjoyable as much as possible, especially for walking and cycling, because I don't think if you just provide the function, people aren't necessarily going to do it, because, for example, you're out in the open on a bike, you're out in the open if you're walking. If you've got a really barren landscape, it's probably not going to be enjoyable. Whereas if you're shaded with trees, the air's a bit cleaner, there's a bit more visual interest, and it's also a bit of physical protection from the fast moving traffic. So it's also about encouraging people to walk and cycle through the design of the road, which is moving on actually to the third point, which is engineering controls. Which, yeah, there's the separation, of course, which is obviously an important one, kind of having the separate cycle lanes, the separate walking facilities, rather than having kind of a shared use footway and cycleway, for example, or having a painted bike lane on the road. Because while it might work for some people, there's going to be a lot of people who just aren't confident enough to cycle with fast moving traffic. And it's just, for most people as well, it's just generally not enjoyable. So, you've got to kind of I think with cycling as well, it's quite a difficult one, because you're essentially serving a kind of demographic or a target audience that doesn't cycle yet. So you've got to think how people who don't ride a bike often, what's going to convince them to ride one. And I think so far, most of the time, we've not been kind of tapping into that target audience as much as we should. You see in like the Netherlands or in Copenhagen, they've kind of achieved that much more. And a lot of that is to do with separate cycling infrastructure, which you're starting to see in the UK actually, but I think we'll see more of it in the future. But so far, there's not been all that much of it. The last two, to be honest, I don't think are particularly effective. So the first one is administrative controls. So in a kind of roads context, this would be changing the way people are driving, changing their behavior. But I think there's quite a strong point that the behavior of drivers is kind of influenced by the way the road's designed. If you've got a wide road, you're going to drive faster on it. If you've got a road with speed bumps, you're going to slow down. If you've got a road with chicanes, you're going to slow down. And things like education, training, enforcement, obviously they're all important, but that's not going to fix the issue on its own, I don't think. And then the last one is PPE, which pretty much completely pointless in my view, because in this context, PPE would be protecting the regular road users from dangerous ones. I don't think you're going to get pedestrians wearing a helmet or like in this picture, a pedestrian's wearing like a high vis kind of belt thing, because it's not really protecting them. It's making them maybe a bit more visible, but once again, it's placing the onus on the victim. You know, if you're a pedestrian, you're more likely to be injured than if you're driving in a crash. And also, are you going to force people to kind of wear PPE? So on this second graph, I think this is New Zealand. They introduced a helmet law, and essentially it suppressed cycling levels. It meant a lot less people were cycling because now you're forced to wear a helmet. And if you were just going to the shops or something, now you got to carry a helmet with you. It's just reducing the convenience. And if less people are cycling, then potentially you've got more people driving, which, you know, is going to make the problem worse. And it also shows that the kind of head injuries didn't really go down. So it didn't even kind of solve the problem. So I think, yeah, PPE is pretty much largely useless. In terms of cars, it obviously can be important, seatbelts and airbags and things like that. But you've also got to consider seatbelts and airbags largely exist because cars are dangerous vehicles, because motor vehicles are dangerous, and because they're driving at high speed. So you need them because they're dangerous. They're not there, you know, to make it safer because it's safer inherently. So in terms of this, kind of applying those principles to my designs, this one is this is a junction between Great George Street and Parliament Street. It's terrible, to be honest. It's so this is just near the Baltic Triangle. It's really bad. You can see there's slip lanes. In some places there's 2 slip lanes on the bottom left one. Then you've got lots and lots of lanes, which is already making it hard to cross, and it's going to be increasing vehicle speeds because of the width of the lanes as well is quite wide. If you're crossing as a pedestrian, you generally have to do it in 2 stages or even 3 stages. And in some of those stages, you don't even have the kind of the push button. So you've just kind of got to go whenever you see a gap in the traffic, which is just terrible, really. And I was thinking, you know, why haven't they included these pedestrian crossings? And I thought perhaps engineers were considering the threat to be pedestrians, because, you know, they're looking at it from a kind of a car-centric point of view. And they're thinking the pedestrians would be a threat because they're going to decrease the traffic flow. So they've tried to discourage people from crossing by not providing the facilities. But I think people are always going to walk. That walking is the kind of primary way people move. People are always going to, if you need to cross the road, you're still going to do it, whether you've got, you know, the facilities or not to do it safely. So I think generally you should be accommodating the way people move rather than kind of penalizing it, especially for walking and cycling. And essentially what I did when I was redesigning this, I just took everything away, looked at the space, and I thought, okay, I got the minimum kind of space for driving in. I still put as many lanes as I thought was needed. Perhaps I was being quite generous on Parliament Street. You can see there's 5 lanes there. Whereas on Great George Street, the road is 2 lanes, but at the junction, it kind of splits into about 4, which is just not necessary. So I kind of provided the minimum space for the road. And then after that, all the surplus space was dedicated to walking and cycling and general public space and greenery, rather than, you know, giving the excess space to the cars to make the lanes a bit wider. So you can see there's a huge amount of space here, actually. These images, yeah, it's the same place. And you can see by removing the kind of turning slip lanes as well, that's probably the biggest change. You can fit kind of a quite large, comfortable kind of pedestrian area. Also very wide bike lanes as well. And it's quite crazy, actually. In the top left kind of area of the picture, You've got about 2 meters of pavement to walk along, and no real cycling facility. And just by removing that slip lane and narrowing the roads, where you'd want to be 2 meters away from the road, you're now 20 meters away. So you're 10 times further away from the moving traffic. So it makes a huge difference. And that's that kind of point. You're isolating the hazards. You're keeping people as far away as possible from the fast moving traffic as possible. And you can see on the picture as well, these two, I've covered the whole thing with trees essentially. And I think these two images will help you see why. The image on the right is exactly the same, just without the trees. And you can see from a driver's point of view, it's, it feels quite wide, it feels quite open. It feels like the place you're going to put your foot down and drive fast. Whereas on the left, it feels a bit more closed, a bit more boxed in. And as you're seeing these trees go past, they're going to whiz past you because they're pretty close. So that's going to make you more conscious of your speed. Whereas, on the left, you've kind of got that tunnel vision. You're looking straight ahead. You're not really seeing the things to the left of you. And just this image on the top right, that's just a kind of a street in France. And they use these kind of tree-lined streets quite a lot there, essentially for that reason, to make people conscious of their speed, because when you've got a long straight road, especially in a rural area as well, it's quite hard to enforce a kind of a speed limit. So by having the kind of trees there, you're creating more of a design speed limit, because people are going to feel uncomfortable driving at a speed when they're seeing these trees kind of fly past them. And that's what I've kind of tried to achieve here, which I think is important for an urban area as well, when you've got people walking around, people cycling. So these trees obviously providing a greening benefit as well. But I think there's also quite a strong traffic calming element too. So these are just some more photos of the design, roughly from the same angles as much as possible, at least on street view. And you can see there's a huge change. You can see, if you look at the bottom left picture, you can see these two people. They're on an island. I think island's quite a good term for it, because you're in the middle of a sea of asphalt pretty much. And it's, you can see it's just not a particularly enjoyable environment. You're kind of just at the will of everyone driving past you. And to be honest, personally, at least, I don't think even those barriers make me feel particularly safe. So, just by kind of reallocating some of the space, tightening the space up, you can create more distance between the different types of road users. You can see in the top right, here there's about 3 or 4 meters of separation between the bus and the road and the bike lane. And then you've got another kind of 1.5 meters between the bike lane and the footway. So if you're walking there, you're about 7 or 8 meters away from moving traffic, which is great compared to the 2 or 3 meters that you would have been before, depending on where you're standing on the pavement. This is the Prince's Avenue Roundabout. This is probably one of the designs in terms of safety, I thought about most. Because this is one I use a lot as well, this roundabout. I cycle on a lot and I walk around it a lot. And it links Prince's Avenue, Prince's Road, which is kind of a big, quite grand boulevard. You've got a kind of a big median with a walking cycle path on it. You've got kind of 3-4 story buildings, quite an impressive street. But then it ends at this roundabout in a really kind of bad way. You've got, if you're a pedestrian, say you're on the median, you've first got to cross 3 lanes of traffic to go left. And then you've got to cross another 2 lanes on this road on the bottom left. And then you walk round, and then you've got to cross another 4 lanes on this zebra crossing. And it takes you all the way out and then back in if you want to go in the park. Because at least in my experience, the main desire line is between Prince's Road and the park. But this roundabout drags you all the way around, which, you're not going to encourage people to walk more if you're forcing them to go a long way. And the same thing with cycling as well. You either have to kind of do the same thing like a pedestrian would, or you're going to have to ride on the roundabout. And it's just about, it's a slightly narrow for two cars to go around at the same time, but it's too wide for one car to go around. So it's kind of this awkward in the middle where it feels like a big roundabout, but it's not actually that huge. And I've had lots of friends say to me, I'm going to get off my bike here when I was with them, or I've lost them as I was cycling with them. And I've seen people almost get hit quite a few times. And yeah, it's not a safe roundabout particularly. There's a few reasons for this. The kind of avenue, because you have the roads on two sides like this rather than that, they come at a tangent, or they come off at a tangent to the roundabout. Ideally, you want the roads to come up to the roundabout, and then at 90 degrees to the kind of the circulatory road, because then you have to turn left before you turn right around the roundabout. Whereas this, you can kind of just go straight. You can see these red lines, particularly coming off Prince's Road and then onto Croxteth Road in the top left. You barely have to turn at all. So people are going to be, not only for cars, it's more dangerous because people are going to be less willing to give way because they don't have to slow down anyway. Whereas if, you've got to slow down, you're going to be more likely to give way, especially to someone walking or cycling as well. And the zebra crossings here are also quite a problem. They're set back quite far away, which is quite a good thing in some ways, but I think they're a little bit too far, because then it makes people driving think they've exited the junction, they've exited the roundabout, so they can go on with their journey. And then all of a sudden this zebra crossing turns up, and then you might have to slow down again. And they're also quite fairly blind corners, actually. So, you want to be able to see if someone's about to cross the road from a long distance away. Because if you're driving 20, 30 miles an hour and all of a sudden a pedestrian's crossing a road, it's going to be a lot harder to stop, and people will be less willing to stop. So this is the design that I've kind of proposed. The first thing is all the entrances and exits are reduced to one lane, which, people might say is going to reduce the traffic flow. And I'd say, yeah, it probably will. But I think that's the trade-off you have to improve the safety. And in terms of these roundabouts, I know in the Netherlands, they're rated to about 25,000 vehicles per day, which is still quite high, actually. So I don't think there's a huge loss in traffic flow. And then the lanes are, where possible, divided on the entrance and exit. So you can see on Croxteth Road in the top left, and I think this is Prince's Gate East on the top right, the lanes are split, which allows space to have a buffer. So when you're walking, you can cross the road, wait, check the car's slowing down, and then cross again. And it also means, it's also actually a way to increase traffic flow, because at least legally speaking, if there's a zebra crossing, you have to wait until, if there was no kind of middle, you'd have to wait until people have crossed all the way to the other side, whereas you only have to wait until they've crossed to the middle. So it stops kind of unnecessary slowing down. And it also pushes the lanes out so that you can see there as much as possible at 90 degrees, or as close to 90 degrees as possible with the roundabout. You can see the red lines. They have to turn left a little bit before they turn right. And then once again, they're turning left to exit the roundabout. And the main thing for cyclists is, of course, there's a bike lane going around the outside. So it's set back about 5 meters from the roadway. And what this means is if a car's turning off the roundabout or entering the roundabout, there's about a 5 meter gap between the road roundabout and the bike roundabout, which means they can stop and give way to a cyclist or give way to a car without blocking the roundabout, which once again is a traffic flow thing, but it's giving people a space to slow down and give way. Because if you provide them with an awkward small space, they're going to want to get out of it. And then by doing that, they might not give way. They might kind of try and force their way through the roundabout. So it's that idea of slowing people down, but also giving them a comfortable place where they don't feel like they're being a nuisance if they're stopped. I will say it's not perfect, actually. In the bottom right, the entrance to Prince's Road is still fairly tangential. You can see it's quite far off 90 degrees. So once you've turned around this roundabout, you can go fairly straight. But because of the median and the way the road's laid out, it's quite hard to change that, unfortunately. So then, there might be additional measures that can mitigate it, like having a kind of a raised table, a speed bump in front of the bike lane and the zebra crossing, or extra signage, which, to be honest, I don't think is the best option. That's kind of a last resort, because if you have to give a sign, you pretty much already failed, at least in my view. This pretty much sums it up. You can see this is the view if you're driving around the roundabout. You can see that the cyclist is quite visible. And when they're going around the roundabout, they'll generally be in a forward position to the car, because the roundabout for bikes is further out. So that gives people driving a lot of time to spot people, especially when you're turning. You don't have to turn your head as much because you're turning the car, so it's going to be turning your field of view anyway. So you have more visibility, and that means there's more time to judge how fast a cyclist's going, whether you're going to be in front of them or behind them, whether you have to stop, and whether there's perhaps more cyclists or pedestrians behind them. And this once again is showing the kind of the field of view. And once again, you can see they're turning left before they're turning right, which allows them to kind of turn their field of view to their left and spot if there's any cyclists approaching. And also, by having that turn, they're going to have to drive slower as well. This is just a kind of I was talking about this earlier, actually, the kind of isolation or separation. And I think there's different levels of separation you can have. The first one would be total separation, which is where the kind of the roadway and the footway or cycleway are separate. And not just separate, I mean they're separated but completely different routes. So for example, you can't drive through the middle of Sefton Park, whereas you can ride your bike through there. So I think that there is potential for routes where you can have totally separated routes. For example, on a motorway, you would probably have a bike path that's a few hundred meters away on a kind of more rural trail, rather than putting a bike lane 6 meters away, because 6 meters in an urban context might be great separation to have, but on a motorway it's not going to make a comfortable environment for people to walk or to cycle. So there is some cases that's generally more a network level thing or a rural thing. In terms of individual designs that I'm making, you can't really do that as such. But what I can do is high levels of separation, which for me is when you start feeling like the road and the cycleway and the footway are separate entities. Like you see this top left picture, if you're cycling there, if you're walking there, you don't feel like you're part of the roadway. You don't feel like you're with traffic. You feel like you're separate from traffic, from vehicle traffic at least. And so this example, or all of these are actually from the Great George Street and Parliament Street example. There's about 6 meters of separation here. And with all the trees, you pretty much can't see the roadway. On the top right, this is quite high medium separation, but it's what I'd still class as medium separation. This is just the other side of the road. You still feel the road near you. You can still tell the road's near you. You can see the cars a bit more. But you've got the kind of trees planting separating you in quite a lot of distance. So the trees for me and kind of grass is vertical separation. Excuse me. You've got a kind of a vertical element separating you from the road. And then the distance is the kind of horizontal separation as well. So medium separation, you've still got quite a bit of both. Once again, the bottom left, this is also medium separation. It's a little bit less actually. This is about 1.8 meters of separation. So you can definitely notice the vehicles going past you. You know, you'd feel the kind of the air gusts and you can hear them a lot more, but you don't feel like they're kind of encroaching on your space as such, which is what you'd feel in low separation, I feel, which is these two bottom images here. So this is kind of the kind of pop-up bike lane kind of style, which has been used quite a lot recently, especially in Liverpool actually, where you've got these wands and they don't really separate you. They give you your own space, of course, but there's no kind of feeling of protection. They don't actually have a physical protection because they're actually plastic ones that you can flip over. But they give at least some kind of mental separation. And they're giving you, you know, a dedicated space as well. I do think they can be improved a little bit. Just with some planting, for example, can kind of make the separation continuous, which I think is an improvement, but it's still not perfect. And then there's no separation. So this is used when there's the speed and volume of dangerous road users, so, you know, motor vehicles is low. For example, quiet ways in London, they're kind of used where there's like low traffic neighborhoods, which are used when there's modal filters kind of separating through traffic, so it's only residential traffic. And they don't have separation, but on the network, on the network scale, they act like total separation, because, you know, you're separating the through traffic for the cars and you're separating the through traffic for the bicycles. So these are a few designs I've done where you've got that no separation kind of mentality. Oh, you'll have to excuse me. So the kind of aim here is to make much more kind of people friendly, you know, pedestrian friendly streets where cars are more like guests rather than the primary users of the space. So yeah, I'm talking about, once again, like LTNs, which are low traffic neighborhoods where through traffic's been filtered out. That works quite well in London because a lot of the streets are fairly gridded, perhaps not on a gridiron level, but there's a lot of different through roads. Whereas, you know, you look at more modern developments and there might only be one way in and out anyway, and the cars also have to use that. So it's a bit more difficult, but on older kind of urban fabrics, that's a little bit more possible. I've used bricks as the like paving in all of these designs. Actually, they're quite common in the Netherlands. There's a visual thing to it. It doesn't look like a road, so it doesn't, you know, it doesn't look like a road. It doesn't feel like a road. It feels like something different. When people enter the space in a car, they're going to notice it's different, and then that, hopefully, the aim is that's going to convince them to slow down, you know, pay a bit more attention. In the Netherlands, that works well because if you're driving there, you pretty much know, if you're on a brick street, you pretty much know it's going to be a 30km/h zone. You know it's going to be a residential area, which makes it even more effective if it's like that on a national or at least a local scale. But even on an individual level, I think it works as well, because it also creates a sensation when you're driving. You can feel the kind of undulation in the road, and that's also going to slow you down a little bit. But also narrowing the roads. Most of my designs in the kind of in the asphalt kind of through roads, I've done 3 meters or 3.2 meters where there's going to be significant bus traffic. But on a residential street, you really don't need 3 meters for one lane. You could probably go down almost to 2 meters. I'd say probably about 2.2 meters wide, because then that's giving you less space on either side of your car. And if you've got, you know, a tighter road, you're going to drive more slowly. That kind of goes back to what I was talking about, Italy and Greece, where you have the medieval towns where people obviously are driving much more slowly. Another thing is kind of tighter corner radiuses. A lot of the time you'll see huge kind of flared exits, which mean, say at a T junction, you're crossing the road. It makes the walk longer to cross the road because you've got these flared exits. Whereas if they're a bit tighter, it means there's less distance for you to walk across, which is, promoting walkability. But it also means cars have to slow down. They've got to turn their wheel a bit more. And that obviously they're not going to do that at a higher speed. So it's getting people to pay attention more when they're driving. And also, perhaps even better option is kind of a continuous footway. So in the two images on the left, these are both continuous footways. On the top left, you can see there's two kind of one-way streets, and then you've got this main through road, or at least residential road. And I've just continued the footway straight over it. So what this means is if you're driving, you've got to raise yourself up onto the street level, onto the footway level. And you're also, you're encroaching on pedestrian space. So you kind of have to drive a bit more slowly and a bit more carefully. The same thing on the bottom left, actually. But there's also a cycle path in this example. But it's the same kind of principle. And then in these two images on the right, so the one on the top right this is kind of just a generic design I made for a terraced street. I think this was an example from Kensington in Liverpool I used, where it's very narrow. It's about 9 meters wide. So I didn't want to just give 6 meters to the cars, especially seeing people park on the pavement anyway, because then you're not going to have a walkable environment. So I've turned it into a one-way street. I've given about 2.5 meters, I think, for the kind of carriageway, which is also made out of bricks, so it doesn't feel like a main road. About 2.3 meters for parking. And then all of the rest of the space is for kind of pedestrians, for greenery, for bike parking, different kind of things like that. And then the bottom right one, this was sort of a design I did for Lawrence Road in Liverpool, which is, there's a lot of different businesses and things on this street. It's kind of the heart of a neighborhood, but it's not a very nice street because there's cars parked everywhere. It feels quite busy, quite noisy, quite intimidating because of all the vehicles, especially parked on the pavement. So I decided, have this brick street. So it feels different when you approach a brick street off the asphalt. You immediately notice it's different. It looks different for a start, but it also feels different. Especially when you have a narrower road, you're gonna have to be paying more attention. And that also means people cycling aren't gonna feel like they're in the way of drivers as much. Because the road's so narrow, it's gonna be, pretty much unfeasible at times for people driving to overtake a cyclist. And you don't want vehicles driving at speeds much faster than a cyclist rides at anyway. So it's kind of designing in that low speed environment. To summarize, safety, at least in my view, it's real physical safety, but it's also, there's a perception of safety. You don't want to be in just a safe environment. A lot of the time you'll see these barriers along the road and they might make it safer. I've read studies actually that say they don't, but they might. But it's also kind of hemming you in. It's not really a perceived safe environment, maybe to some people, but it's also, it's kind of like that mentality of like anti-terrorist barriers. They might have a real safety benefit, but if you're seeing all these barriers everywhere, you're not going to feel safe because you're thinking, why are all these barriers here? Clearly there's something dangerous, so I think, you've got to perhaps use more soft measures to have the physical safety as well, which I like trees. I think they're great because, it's a natural element rather than just having giant barriers everywhere. And of course, they're providing shade and air quality benefits, loads of other benefits. But yeah, the third point, removing or reducing dangerous road users, I think it's the best option, but isn't always possible, obviously. And that's something that probably has to be done on a kind of a network level, which, in my designs, I'm not really doing a network. I'm just focusing on one specific place. So generally isolation is the best option, where you still want the vehicles, or you still need the vehicles in the same kind of volume and speed to remain. So you're giving people their own separate space essentially. But there's varying levels of isolation, I think. For example, if you're on a busy kind of urban through road, you might want a high level of separation, 3 meters buffer, a bike lane, or as much as possible. Whereas if you're on a kind of a side street and you've got like a contraflow bike lane, for example, you might only need a small buffer, or only even a bit of paint to, show there's a contraflow bike lane. It really depends on the context, really. And then at 20 miles or below, that's really when you don't need the separation as much. But if you've got a 20-mile-per-hour road and you've still got lots of people driving there, there might be a case to have some separation still. And then the last thing, for me, there should be some kind of classification on the different kinds of roads. For example, local distributor, residential urban arterial. We've got, you've got M roads, motorways, A roads and B roads, but they don't really work. Sometimes you have a B road that's, smaller and like, less designed for speed than an adjacent, non-classified road. I don't think they really make sense that much. I think, you should be able to drive on a road and you should instantly know what kind of road it is. You should know, oh, I'm on a major road, I'm on a residential road, which is, I think that's something they've done in the Netherlands really well, because, the residential areas are often brick streets. So, you need to drive at 30 kilometers an hour at most because you're on a brick street. You instantly know it. You don't need a sign to tell you it, because, if you miss the sign, you might not know in the UK. And then, that's obviously a dangerous thing, because you might think this road's 40 miles an hour, and you're driving 50 or 60, for example. And if a local authority changes the speed limit, you might not know as well, because you've always driven there. But if the design's not any different, there's nothing telling you should drive slower. So I don't think, relying on signs is the best way of doing it. I think you should rely on the way the street looks, and the way it's designed, the lane widths, for example, and the materials that the road's used for. So yeah, that's generally my thoughts. None of this is particularly scientific. It's my opinion at the end of the day, but I do think there is a case for all of those things to kind of make streets not just physically safer, but more enjoyable, a nicer environment, so that more people might decide, oh, I'm going to walk more, I'm going to cycle more, I'm going to try it, even if not for all of their trips, but it gives them the option. That's my general thoughts anyway. So yeah, thank you for listening, everyone. You'll have to excuse my pollen issues. But I hope that was interesting for everyone.
Thanks so much. I really enjoyed that. Are there questions from the audience? Adolphus?
Yeah. Oh, I go first?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Good afternoon, Todd. So thank you so much for your insightful discussion. It's really enjoyable. Really like the artist's impression of what your dream plan for the city is. I really love it. And basically, I just have two questions about this, very short ones. But we'll go through one by one. So the first question is essentially, I'm not sure if this is covered, but will you agree that sometimes, not only another risk for the on the pedestrian side is also the timing of the crossing, because I noticed that the pedestrian lights they only give like, less time than usual to cross the roads. And
Yeah.
yeah,
That's the thing I've noticed myself as well a lot of the time. Another thing as well is in the UK, it's quite common to have 2-stage crossings where you have to press the button, you cross the road halfway, and then you have to wait again.
Yeah.
So in my designs, I've generally tried to make them single-stage crossings. Obviously, I'm not creating the traffic light timings, but I would obviously be giving plenty of time, and also where it's possible, having the cars stop quite a few meters back from where people are crossing, so it doesn't feel like when you're crossing the road there's all these cars waiting at the traffic lights, ready to run you over.
Yeah, because I was actually worried, like not for me, but in the elderlies who might be,
Especially.
less mobile compared. So, all right. Yeah, so that's actually mainly the first question, and then the second one is, I think in later part of the presentation, you talk about possibility use of bricks, to actually do the road, to make the roads and make it probably more pleasant for the drivers. Just wondering what would be the cost of like implementing those bricks over like conventional materials like tar and all that for the roads.
Yeah, this is a tough one because I've looked and it's quite hard to find information on it.
Right.
Generally, material cost bricks are going to be more expensive than asphalt, and also say if you're repairing a road, resurfacing it, 80% of asphalt's recycled, so there is a kind of a benefit there that asphalt's being recycled, which is a good thing. But it's one of those things where it's going to be difficult to do it now, but in 50 years time you're going to be paying off the rewards, because you're not going to get potholes in a brick road, for example. And if you have a few problems with the road, you just need to replace a few bricks. You don't have to send a huge team out with a truck and relaying asphalt, and there's oil involved, and I think we should be moving away from that. And maybe it's my visual preference, but I think it looks nicer, and there is a traffic calming element as well.
I agree on this part. Like I prefer, and then also you mentioned about the potholes, which is one of the common problems in Liverpool, because like I do cross country, and then at night, when we have training at night, the winter period, it gets very dark. You can't see the potholes. Many of us just end up falling inside and tripping over, possibly break our ankles. So that was actually another big risk that I think could be mitigated if we use bricks. And I'm not sure how much will bricks help to prevent
one thing I've not actually considered and not seen other research consider is the cost of kind of injury claims that come from potholes. I read an article the other day, and it was like some councils spend millions per year.
Millions a year?
Yeah, millions. Some individual claims in the hundreds of thousands of pounds because someone's had a life-changing injury because of a pothole.
Gosh.
I think reducing the chance of that happening is gonna give the council more money in the long term, for example, but it's also going to reduce the kind of the injury, the human cost of it as well.
Yeah. Oh man, I didn't realize that it goes up to million. All right, no, but that's actually a very insightful like number that you're sharing. And definitely worth like look into this more. Thank you so much for your presentation once again. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you very much for listening.
Right.
Other questions?
I can jump in if no one else.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Thanks very much for the talk. It was nice seeing some like greener ideas for Liverpool. Couple of like musings. First of all, like I don't know, is there any indication just in terms of the design of cycle paths, assuming, because it seems to me that it's not necessarily practical to be asking for these high levels of separation from the road to a cycle path, given the amount of building and infrastructure redevelopment that would cost.
Yeah.
And would some like the low separation with just like the little bollards might provide like a good level of additional safety for the cyclist. But in a case where you're trying to indicate a cycle lane, presumably I would imagine having a painted like the red road indicating a cycle lane as a visual indicator of like this is a different area for a different kind of traffic I don't know, are you aware of anything to say whether or not that is actually more effective at communicating to drivers that these are two separate areas of the road and you shouldn't be straying into like the red area?
Well, personally, yeah, I do think the red is definitely beneficial, and I think, I've not seen specific studies that I've been comparing them, but I think the evidence is the Netherlands. They, nationwide, if it's red, there's a cycle path there, you shouldn't be driving in it, which might be harder to do here because some people might be doing green bike lanes or tan colored ones. But I generally think people, if they see a different color, it's a different space. And I do think, with the ones, I think the ones on their own is pushing it a little bit, but with ones and a red cycle lane, I think it's low separation, but it's functional, definitely. I don't think you have to have the perfect amount everywhere, but if you're riding your bike somewhere for 5 miles, for example, 3 miles of it might be on these red bike lanes with a little bit of separation, but then you've also got the other 2 miles that might have a bit more separation, or in a low traffic street. It's trying to find the average kind of level of separation over your journey. You might not want to be you might not feel comfortable on the kind of light separation all the time, but it's more intermittent, it's not everywhere. And if you're at junctions are the main conflict points. So that's the main issue with physical safety, and generally there's more space in junctions because a lot of the time we've got really wide flared turns which can be narrowed down, whereas with the straight sections of road it is a little bit more difficult to find the space. But in my experience, there is a lot of space. It's obviously not always usable. For example, you might have to be shifting a road over, which is going to be expensive, obviously. But I think you've got to start somewhere, and I think that light segregation is definitely a great place to start, because it's all well and good having one bike lane that's a mile long and it's perfect, but if you can't get to the bike lane safely and you can't get out of it safely, it's useless.
Prince's Road is a great example of that.
Yeah.
I can chip in here. I think first of all, I just want to commend you on your efforts that you make. It's really great to see that. So I think we were all really surprised and really proud to see your name in the newspapers and your designs. I think it's a great effort that obviously you made in your own time. It's really good. And I think I'm always really pleased when I see a new generation of planners that really embrace kind of sustainability and active travel and plant trees. That's fantastic. So it was a really good presentation. Really, you put a lot in. There were so many aspects that we could discuss and comment on. And just on that issue on the painted on bike lanes, one issue is behavior from other people who drive and park their cars, and they're usually parked across these bike lanes. So especially I cycle into town to campus on Woolton Road.
I've been down there. It's terrible.
Actually, you're basically squashed on kind of half of what's left of the bike lane next to a parked car on one side, and then the fast moving traffic that people trying to overtake you on the other. So whilst I think that there should be different measures, and you mentioned obviously different types of streets and residential streets that might need no separation at all because it's local traffic only, and then you have the busy streets that kind of feed a lot of traffic into town where you wanted maybe a bit more separation. I think the issue of people parking on bike lanes, especially on schools as well, or when you have residential properties facing the main streets, it's a real issue. So I would always say, but maybe in that case, your designs that showed kind of the green strips and tree planting are actually quite nice, because you physically separate cyclists from the street space.
And people they're not going to want to park on some grass as much, whereas with a bike lane it's easy to do. You can just drive there.
Exactly. And nobody can park on it. The fact also that most people then just kind of swing, I'm always ready to kind of avoid kind of a car door swinging open, and you kind of get smashed. And I think that I think the behavior is also an issue. So I think there's a lot of work to be done and kind of recognizing kind of cycling as a real good alternative, and to respect cyclists as well.
Yeah.
And the point you made about making people who walk and cycling responsible for their safety, that the onus should be on them to stay safe rather than those who drive or who choose to drive, and enforcing kind of their behavioral change, being more aware and kind of take care of others who have obviously no airbags to protect them, was a good point as well. But you said about equipment, most of it is about making people who walk and cycle visible, but obviously drivers are much more protected, but they don't protect others. It's about protecting them in their car, and not kind of the whatever they might hit. So I think there's a need and kind of like behavioral change, and seeing the benefits, that you pointed out, and greening urban areas, giving people a choice. I think I like that, that you didn't say everybody must drive, stop driving, we all have to walk and cycle, that you mentioned that there should be a choice and you accommodate different needs, and then maybe over time we see that behavioral change. I think that was really good. So it can be a general attitude I really do like. Stop here.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's I think there's a clear shift in mentality that's kind of needed, but I think also that's I'm not going to expect anyone who's driving the car and driven it all their life just to say, oh yeah, I'm not going to park in the bike lane anymore because someone might want to cycle there. But if I put a strip of grass in front of it and some trees, they're going to park in front of the trees or somewhere else because they're going to instinctively know that they can't park there. So I think, for me at least, I feel like the best way of changing the behavior is, subtly, not telling people what to do, but kind of, guiding them and showing them what they can and can't do.
I think just one aspect, one issue that we have, and you said, you talked about the grid streets, of which we have obviously plenty in Liverpool as well, the traditional kind of Victorian terrace streets, is that obviously post World War II in particular, obviously urban, suburban areas were designed around cars, and that's where we see the problems, that you have such great distances between where you live and where your leisure, where your job is, and these great distances obviously are an obstacle, and people might be less enthusiastic about kind of like cycling for half an hour to work, and when you, if it's just kind of going to work and then back home, that's one thing. Elderly people would struggle, of course, and then you really need public transport to support them. Then people with maybe younger children have a number of journeys to make during the day, kind of nursery or primary school or both. You need to do your shopping, and there are the swimming lessons. I've been through that. And there are parts of Liverpool that have been modified so much. They're actually designed for driving. You can't do all the things that you need to do without a car. That's where we need to change urban areas as well. So it comes with the land use, with kind of the diversity in areas. Because we've with Eddie, who is also in this meeting and has listened to your presentation, we've been working in the L8 area, and there was once bath along Lodge Lane, and I don't think that's open anymore. But it just made me think, how far do I have to travel to reach like a swimming pool for my children or for myself even? We used to have things locally in the neighborhoods. We used to have a cinema on Allerton Road. When I think, where are the nearest cinemas? Well, they are all really in driving distance. I'm not going to spend an hour and a half to get to the cinema. So that is also part of the change that is needed. Kind of how diverse are our neighborhoods? What can you actually reach within 10, 15 minutes, perhaps? I think that's also part of that rethinking of that kind of urban revolution that we need. Alongside with the provision that you're wanting to make.
Yeah, I very much agree, 100%. Yeah.
Looks like Eddie Taylor wants to speak.
There are a few comments in the chat as well, Todd. I don't know if you have been able to see them. So some questions and comments.
Oh, I'll have a look.
Well, shall I just jump in there? Is that all right?
Yeah, sure.
Hi. Yeah, so just to introduce myself first of all. I'm an urban planner and designer, and I've been working with Stephanie on the urban design course, and I'm also chair of the Merseyside cycling campaign, and they've been, campaigning for this sort of thing for a long time and wanting to see this sort of thing. I haven't actually seen the article in the Echo, so I'll have to try and have a look at that. But I thought it was great, and I thought the designs looked really good, and I really enjoyed the presentation, and I just found myself nodding along, all the time with everything you're saying. I mean, yeah. It's great to see, and I mean, there's all the different issues that you were looking at. I mean, I've come across these sorts of issues, like things like metal barriers, trying to take them out. I used to work for Sefton Council, and in Southport, one of the things we did there is we took the metal barriers out along the road because they just seem to make people drive faster. If people have if you've got metal barriers, people think, well, pedestrians are over there, I can drive. Yeah. I think the other thing about segregation, I mean, is it's not just about safety. I think there's also a big thing about status as well. So very often when you drive, people drive because it's more convenient, but it's not even. But people even drive, I find, and I find myself doing it, even when it's not more convenient, simply because you actually have higher status. Like if you think about Bowl Street before that was when you could drive down there, it wasn't particularly convenient to drive, but people still did it. Yeah. Because you might have 3 cars down there and 300 people, and yet the cars have as much space as all the people, and all these people are crammed to one side, and all the people, the 3 people in cars have as much space as everybody else, and the people on them have to get out of their way. And I think that we have to sort of rethink. There's like a cultural change that's necessary. And I think when it comes to behavioral change, I think the main behavioral change I would like to see is not in pedestrians and drivers, it's actually in highways departments, because I agree with what you say that, like, I mean, a lot of people in the cycling campaign want to do training, training for people to cycle. But if you look at where there's been significant increases in the numbers of people walking and cycling, it's not been because they've been training to do that. It's because they put the infrastructure in. That's what takes.
Riding a bike isn't difficult. It's quite easy, but it's the I guess the training is how to safely negotiate a junction or something, but you're only having to learn that because the junction's not designed in a way that allows you to use it easily. I mean, you can fall off a bike, but it's like that's not a big problem if you fall off a bike in a bike lane. It is a problem if you fall off a bike in front of a car. And I mean, I've been riding a bike for years, and I was still nearly killed on Lodge Lane a couple of years ago, just riding along perfectly safely because the people, the infrastructure isn't there. So the training can only ever get people so far, and you'd have to train up hundreds of thousands of people. The resources are just not there. I think that we do need, but I mean, you mentioned, just take an example, which one I always pick up on is the tighter radii you mentioned. So I live in L8, and I know I know the junction is Great George Street, which you're talking about, on Princess Avenue, and I know and I think they're all really good approaches you've taken. But interestingly, on the end of Sefton Park Road and Ullet Road, they've just been doing lots of work there, and I don't remember anyone doing any engagement to see how people felt about this work. They just did it because it's highways work. It just gets done. It's for cars, so they just do it. Whereas if you want to do anything for cycling, that's like years and years of engagement. Lobby for it,
Yeah. But anyway, they did it, and I wasn't sure what they were going to do. And at the end of it, there's this absolutely massive radius, which must be 12 to 15 meters wide. And guess what? Cars can go around there in 3rd and 4th gear, and they're going around they're going into Sefton Park Road at 40 miles an hour. And I think the problem, and this has been in Manual for Streets, a lot of the things you talk about, Manual for Streets since 2007, and that's standard highways guidance. And you could wallpaper the offices of all the highways engineering departments with guidance that's telling them to do stuff that you're saying, and they just don't do it. And that's the thing. That's the big problem I've got is with the way things are done is that they already know this. Yeah, they should already know most of this. I mean, I know there's some of the stuff you're doing, is perhaps more cutting edge, what they're doing in Holland and things like that. But some of the very basic things, which would make a huge difference, they're cumulative. They do make a cumulative impact. They should have been doing. I mean, just one question before I go is just a sort of more technical one. I mean, you probably were pointing roundabout. I'm sure you're aware of the
Yeah,
point.
yeah, yeah.
I was wondering whether you'd considered that solution in when you looked at the two junctions you looked at, whether that was, because I know there are issues with shared surfaces, and particularly
Yeah.
blind people have issues with them and stuff and things like
Yeah.
that.
From what I've kind of read and heard points and what seems to have worked, I think a lot of people give it a stick. But at the end of the day, there's huge amounts of traffic there, and they couldn't build a ring road, which probably would be the best option to reduce traffic. But they've worked with what they had, and I think they reached quite a good outcome. I think a lot of people, don't like shared space because it's kind of new and it's uncomfortable. I think a little bit about it is it has to be a little bit uncomfortable, especially for a driver. You have to be aware of the surroundings, but obviously the design has to ensure you're both aware, but you're also driving slowly as well. So I did think about, could I do this? I looked at the Prince's Road roundabout, and I thought, could you do something like that here? But I don't know, it just didn't seem like the right kind of space to do it. Because originally I did think, if you're walking or cycling down Prince's Road, is there some way you can, instead of going round the roundabout, kind of go straight through it? I thought, is that a way? But yeah, they're very experimental, and I did think, in that case, especially when places like Liverpool are quite new to, people-friendly streets, maybe go with the less experimental, at least the ones that have been tried and tested in the Netherlands more first, and then maybe in other places you can start playing with shared spaces and things like that.
Okay, thanks.
Do you agree, actually, then, that the Netherlands really is I mean, they're way ahead of us, don't you?
Yeah, definitely.
I mean,
I think the main thing in the Netherlands, they have the infrastructure there, obviously, but I think it's every time they're upgrading a road, they're going forwards. They're not kind of regressing. I don't think they feel too afraid to kind of change the status quo as well.
they're taking
quite significant ways as well.
They're taking seriously the guidance that Eddie Taylor mentioned. It's been around for a long time, but it's just been ignored.
Yeah.
I often wonder the sort of supposedly Liverpool is the origin where the school of architecture was first invented, and I've often thought it's because we have such bad architecture, and it seems that road design can really flourish here because there's such a great possibility for improvement on the stuff that we see around. I've only lived in Liverpool for 4 years, but I've seen 3 people lying injured in the roads where they've been hit by automobiles or buses. 3 people in 4 years. It's quite a shocking statistic. So do you think that nudging? I mean, when you say you don't tell people what to do, but you want to suggest it to them, that's called nudging in the general sense, where governments don't necessarily issue laws; they just make it more comfortable for you to do it the right way. Do you think that is really the key to all of this, or clearly you need enforcement too, I presume, but how far do you think nudging alone can get us?
I think I'd say about halfway. I think you have to do other things as well. That's the kind of the road design, maybe on the small scale. You're looking at a specific road. How can we redesign it to nudge people into driving more slowly? But you've also got to look on the grand scale. I think there's other things that have to be done as well. For example, perhaps a congestion charge or something like that. So you've got less vehicles around the city centre. Of course, investing in public transport, so there's less vehicles on the road in the first place, or at least the vehicles are carrying more people. Buses, for example. Sometimes it's carrot and stick, isn't it? You've redesigned the road, it might make more people want to cycle, but then at the moment you've got lots of people driving there that don't want it changed, because then it might make it slightly harder for them to drive for the next 5-10 years or so. So it's a difficult one, but I do think if you're going to do it right, you have to have not just changing the designs, but you've got to be enforcing things as well. Like, you can't park on the pavement, at least in certain spaces. You can't drive at an insanely high speed here. Of course, I say that, you know, the road should be designed for a speed limit, but there's still places where I think having the speed limit there lower is beneficial. You know, saying all residential streets should be 20, for example, or even all streets in the city centre perhaps should be 20, things like that.
I've read, I don't know if it was in the Echo or somewhere else, that parking on the pavement would now be an offense that they're going to be seriously going after. Is this, I don't know if it's Liverpool specifically or the Mersey area or England in general, but you must be excited about that.
I think it's England in general, I think.
So do you think that that's going to work? Because people are still parking on the pavement today, I've noticed.
Yeah, it's quite a hard one, because, you know, some people have been saying, oh well, if people park in the road, well, how are people going to be able to drive down the road? There won't be enough space, which I'd say then you've got too much parking. But then if you've got too much parking and you have to take it away, people might be complaining about that.
Right.
There might be, you know, a genuine concern that they've got nowhere to put their cars. But at the end of the day, it's the mentality. It's, oh, you can't, I have to park on the pavement. But then what if I say, well, I have to walk, you know,
right.
Or there's someone in a wheelchair, I have to walk. Why is the person driving their car treated as more important? I think, you know, there has to be a more equitable look at it. So I'm hopeful that it will go through. There might be a few caveats about it, but yeah, I generally think it would be a good idea.
I think, and I think there is an issue there about status. Is like if I decided, you know, I got fed up with lugging my bike up and down the stairs, I thought what I'll do instead is I'll put a container the size of a car on the street. I'll just leave it there to keep my bikes in. It would be moved. The council would come along and tell me to move it. But I've put a car there. You can do it. You can store a car on the street. You try and store anything else, you get told to move it.
It's a taboo, isn't it? It's
what you need to do is buy a van and keep the van on the street.
Yes.
Yeah.
a vehicle-shaped storage unit.
Yeah.
Somewhere I read, it's been a few weeks ago, that people got into trouble because they put a bike shed in their front garden.
In Leicester, I think.
I don't know if you saw that. I don't know where and when that was and on which place, but that was an issue as well. Obviously, it's, you know, when you have these restrictions, like say you can't park on the pavement anymore. Where I live, you know, you can, the streets, a lot of the side streets are one way, and there are cars parked on both sides, and they also need a bit of pavement so that, as you said, no vehicles can still get through. So if you ban this, half of the cars or half of the people can't park their car anywhere anymore. And I think it's a really important measure, as you said, you know, for people in wheelchairs, blind people, children, anyone. It just makes it, you know, safer. And I think it needs to come with a package of opportunities, alternatives. And we've seen international examples where they took flyovers away, for example, in San Francisco, but they created alternatives straight away. Yeah, so kind of if we could get, you know, our trams back, if we had a fantastic cycling network a la Copenhagen, lots of bike storage, you know, in residential streets, bike hoops everywhere, you know, in front of shops and restaurants and services, I think then you know, people see an alternative. So at the moment, I think people are upset because they say, well, where do I park my car? There's no other improvement. So I think if there was a rounded package of alternatives and improvements alongside with these restrictions, and I think that would be really good. But just having the restrictions and kind of expecting people to wait for 40 minutes for a bus home, I think that's not really attractive. So I think they need, you know, a package of measures, kind of enabling kind of that shift. Or we need kind of, you know, hubs, transport hubs, where you can, you know, hop onto a tram, a bus, or your bike, and you can store your bike safely. Somebody in the chat mentioned earlier on, you know, the scooters, and I think it's just terrible for a number of points. One being, you know, that people aren't actually physically active. They just stand on the scooter and they're going at really high speeds and breaching often speed limits, even down kind of our street, which is 20 miles, and they must do at least 35 just for fun. If anyone was to back out of the driveway, you know, they would be certainly kind of seriously injured at best. So you actually need a kind of a range of techniques to to incentivize people to be more physically active. So, which is one real benefit, and obviously saving money as well on kind of insurance, buying the car, MOT, or the repairs, and the stress of finding a parking space where you live, but wherever you're going. So I think if we had a big package of measures, that would be really good. And at one point, I wanted to make us just a reminder, when we had the previous Labour mayor, I think one of the first actions was to get rid of the bike lane, the bus routes, the bus lanes, sorry. So we had on key routes into town and into the suburbs, dedicated bus routes, and they're all gone. And every junction improvement was actually to the disadvantage of people, at least like walking. It takes you a lot longer to cross all these junctions that have been supposedly improved. The focus was entirely on driving. And I think that's why, because Scott, you are relatively new to the city, I think that gave people the feeling that it's all about cars. And with the pandemic and obviously the call for people to avoid public transport, we've seen an increase in cars, especially in the more suburban areas. So many more people actually purchased, a car or a second car to be able to avoid going by bus. I think that's quite, we've seen that shift away from active travel, and the bike rental scheme that we had was quite complicated, as the way you had to register. I think it's much easier to actually rent these e-scooters. I think my children tell me you just need your bus card, so your metro travel card, and you can just scan it. And we should have had this for the bikes as well. I think Todd is agree.
Yeah, for me, I feel like the scooters are popular because the bikes were just so bad. For example, in London, I know they've got e-scooters now, but I'm having a feeling that they won't be nearly as successful, simply because you've got the Santander bikes, which they're so convenient, whereas the Liverpool ones, I've tried the electric ones a few times, and it's a bit of a faff to kind of pull them out of the parking spaces. They don't always work. They've got flat tires. But there's other ones as well that aren't electric, and I still don't know how to use them. And if I don't know how to use it, then someone who's less tech savvy, who's older, might not know how to use it as well. And there's they need to be just visible as well, I think.
Can I just raise a point talking about shared spaces?
Yeah.
Thinking about there are some streets in Dingle where it's a separate road surface. It's a brick road surface, and you go through, and there is some sense of you're in some kind of a different area when you go in. But I wonder to what extent having like the raised pavement changes the perception of a separation between pedestrian area and road area. Because I know, going back to the Frodsham Street example in Chester, they don't have a raised pavement. It's all just one flat thing. And I remember when it first happened, it felt kind of weird and unsafe having like these buses, because the whole thing now felt just like a big pavement.
Yeah.
And it felt initially unsafe just having these buses driving on pavement, but it eventually, I don't know, it kind of felt like, well, it's your pavement. And I don't know if doing away with having the raised separation of pavements, I don't know if there are some like safety reasons or things that might mandate that in certain areas. But do you think that would contribute, like removing that would contribute to a sense of almost making the driver feel more unsafe moving through, not unsafe, but making them more cautious moving through this area?
Well, I think there's a few points there. I think even when you have a street of low traffic or no traffic, and there's still curbs, like for example, Bold Street being temporarily pedestrianized recently, you still see a lot of people walking along the pavement.
Yeah.
Because you've got a barrier, this curb. Your people are used to it. They see, oh, here's the curb, here's the pavement, here's the road, that's where the cars go, that's where the people go. So I think people are still used to it. You do see a lot more people walking now because they know there's traffic not there, especially as time goes on. But I think there's a few points. I think having those curbs, you see, I notice a lot less in France, especially in Southern Europe in general. Actually, you'll see a lot less curbs in kind of city centres. You'll kind of blobs, kind of designating, or just at a flat level but a different road surface. So it's all kind of flush. And you know, you might think, oh well, for visually impaired people, it could make it difficult because they don't know there's a curb. But also on the converse, it could also make it easier for wheelchair users because they don't have to go down a curb, which could be, you know, an inconvenience for them. There's a lot of different ways to view it. But I'm personally of the opinion that you shouldn't just assume you need a curb everywhere. But you know, there's general points for it. You might need it for drainage, for example. You might need it to avoid people park on the pavement anyway, but you know, to avoid people parking in certain spaces. But I do think, you know, bollards can also achieve that. And I think, you know, they can also make an area feel a little bit special by having, you know, decorative bollards, or, you know, different road surfaces can make an area feel unique. So, you know, there's a visual thing. But I think also doing that, I do think having a kind of a flat area flush, drivers do feel a bit more like they're not the primary user,
like they're intruding on.
Yeah. But then I say that, and then I talk about Exhibition Road in Kensington, which is just a bad example. But I think that's because essentially what they've done is just given a giant flat piece of asphalt or whatever stones they're using, and then they've decorated it with some different colors, which, you know, it doesn't really work. I think with these, it ultimately just comes down to the design. You need to think about it. You need to consult with people about it.
Yeah, like having things, almost like having things in the road, because as a road user, you're then conscious that, like, you're not separated off from these bollards and they are in your way. You have to, like, it's down to you to not, like, I don't know if it sounds stupid, but it's down to you to not drive into them. So you're more cautious because there is no clear thing that you should keep to.
Yeah. I'm just looking through the comments now. I realize probably some people have gone and I've not answered their questions.
I'll send you the copies of the comments in case they're interesting to you.
Yeah, but if I can just answer a few of them now. So, for example, Francis talked about the e-scooters, like multiple close calls and how they can ride on the pavement. Yeah, I do think there's a problem. You know, they're not actually allowed to be on the pavement. But I do think you've also got to think why people are riding on the pavement, and that's because they don't have you know, an alternative space. They're probably too scared to ride on the road. But there's no kind of, say, a cycle lane, for example. There's no kind of provided space for them, and I think that's also because it's new. It's a new thing. So it's going to have issues now while it kind of settles in. But I think, people shouldn't be riding them on the pavement, for example. But like, I can see why people do it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I guess I'm just annoyed because I've had scooters almost crash into
same, me too.
And I'm just like, what are you doing? Like, you're going so fast on the pavement. Like, I almost think it's safer to be on the road, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, one thing about them as well, I guess, you know, with a car, especially if a car's driving not particularly fast, it's a bit more predictable. A car can't quickly veer into you as such, whereas someone on a scooter's dodging left and right really quickly. You know, they're quite maneuverable. So I think that, you know, they you know, can make it quite uncomfortable when you're walking, especially when they're flying past you, because if you think, do I need to step left? But then if they turn left, we're both screwed, you know. There's a few problems with them, but
I mean, I love them, but I think I love them because they're fun, but only because they're dangerous, you know.
It's a bit of a thrill.
I really think it's an accident waiting to happen.
Are you one of those who ride the scooters on the pavement, Francis?
Sorry, what's that?
Are you one of those who rides scooter on the pavement?
Oh no, definitely not. In the park maybe, but I think on the road it's more fun anyway. But I mean,
yeah,
it's I can see why some people are afraid to go on the road, but I think that's just, if you're going to do it, you need a provisional license or a driving license to use them anyway. You should
I've
feel
seen people
comfortable to
do
use
the
the road.
Titanic once on the scooters, and like two freshers were on the road opposite my hall doing a Fast and Furious race on the road. So it's like, wow, accident waiting to happen.
Agreed. But yeah, that was just a comment. I don't think it's really a question, kind of strong question. Within that comment, but.
Sorry, someone ask a question.
Sorry, go ahead.
I just want to congratulate Todd, because I think this is really good presentation, a lot of good thinking. I just wonder, because I live in London, I'm start to understand better Liverpool, and I think the places you try to transform is actually might be the most problematic areas, and even the kind of edge of some particular, near the university, but not really kind of in between residential area and then some other outer area. So it's more like ignored places. So I would like to see more places, in particular, more systematic, like how to make it a little bit more make safer, or more people can walk and cycle if they don't have car. And I just wonder, what is their next steps? Because even in London, I think it's still very dangerous to cycle in London, because the space, the role, how to share the role and how to rearrange it for different uses is still very political. So how can we really to make that step forward to take these good ideas and not just Liverpool, but also other cities in the UK? Yeah, so I just wonder, what is your next step? Are you going to talk to the local authority, or or to do this in another more substantial work as a dissertation or something?
I guess I'm not sure at the minute. I'll see where it kind of takes me. Yeah.
Well, I can suggest some things.
Yeah, go ahead, go for it.
I think what you need to do now is, given that we seem to be in a sort of a moral battle with the car people, in a sense, what you need to do is quantitatively understand the effects that your suggested designs would have on mobility and on traffic through flow. That way you can express, the benefits they will also have in terms of risk, health risks, personal injury risk, as well as pollution risk. To be able to express those in contrast with whatever impact they might have on, the things that transportation scientists consider important. And it could be that you actually have a positive effect on them, including accident reduction, because that's, of course, very important to them. But they do seem to be focused on just one piece of the puzzle. And so making yourself quantitative to express those risks with numbers, even if those are, highly uncertain numbers, that will be, I think, key to getting them to the table to make this communication that's clearly necessary start to happen, to get them to stop ignoring the things that they've known about.
I definitely agree. You kind of just got to force them, because it's easy for us to talk about, and we generally know if you do this, there's going to be a benefit, at least in the long run anyway. But yeah, I think having concrete kind of evidence in their context as well, not just saying in the Netherlands they've done this, in France they've done this, but saying in Liverpool you can do this, for example. I think there's definitely, that's important. And I think collecting evidence, or modeling traffic, modeling movements, things like that is definitely an important way.
Are you familiar with those software tools that there are games? I think they're games they're sort of like SimCity, but you basically design roadways and connections, network connections, to improve traffic. And there are videos that I've seen on YouTube where people show you how to correct your transportation network to get the best traffic flow. So if you put in too many roads, turns out the traffic backs up in some funny ways. I would love to see you interacting with those sorts of simulations. And I would love to see, for instance, how the improvements that you design could be incorporated into those simulations. I think that would be extraordinarily.
Yeah, I'd love to see that as well. So I'll have to find some way of getting my hands on some software, maybe. Yeah,
I'll send you some links.
Yeah. In the long term, that's what I'd love to do, actually. Yeah.
I feel like I do think a lot of these suggestions could have a lot of benefit, but I don't know that it's necessarily so cut and dry that these are all good ideas. I mean, like, personally for myself, thinking about the modifications you've been suggesting to the Strand, like, that's a pretty
yeah, I mean, I will say straight away with that one, I was pretty much just getting people's attention. That was not a more practical thing.
But I mean,
but your argument that if it had started out as a pedestrianized or pedestrian focused, and someone suggested putting a highway through there, nobody would have allowed it.
Yeah.
So
that's the difficult thing, I guess. People are using it, as a highway now. And
if you restrict the traffic, that'll displace traffic off into more residential areas.
Yeah.
Because there's not really any other good route that doesn't go
in
through.
In a few years, it might make people change their habits or change their trips, but then you're going to have to deal with the problem for a few years if you don't have a sufficient alternative in place. I don't know, a great metro or trams or really great buses everywhere on a cycling network. There's carrot and stick. You can't take away without giving.
I mean, just to sort of pick up on it, like, what do you do with this? Where do you take this? I mean, I would say as in the cycling campaign, we'd certainly extend an invitation to you to work with us, because that is kind of what we're trying to do. And we're trying to do it lots of different ways. We're trying to speak to decision makers, whether they're councillors or officers, but also, the media, or also other adjacent campaigning groups and the general public and things like that. I think one way that will, I think, is really important is air quality, because I don't think people really get how serious the air quality issue is. And I think that maybe, hopefully, that there's going to be some more evidence about air quality coming forward that's going to become more publicly available, because there's a lack of air quality sensors in the region. And maybe when people know more about that, hopefully that will wake people up a little bit too, because the numbers of people being hit by cars, I think it's something like 1,500 a year get killed in the UK, and Liverpool is one of the worst cities, but the number of people who are dying from pollution, I think it's in the tens of thousands. I think it's 40,000, something like that. I mean, it's horrific, and most of that comes from car pollution. So I think that is one way. And in terms of what Scott was suggesting, I mean, this sort of being able to put figures on things, if you can do it, is useful, because that certainly always seems to me the highway engineers, one of the reasons they get their way when they say you need to do this is because they can just stick a report on someone's table, a decision maker's table, and you click through it and there's graphs and there's numbers and stuff, and you think, Jesus, this is physics, this is engineering, this is like, how can I get my head around this? This is all numbers, it's proof, it's science. Well, if I argue,
it doesn't even have to be right, but at the end of the day,
exactly.
you can put it there.
Well, I think the problem with modelling it is, I mean, and again, the point was brought up about displacement. Will you lead to displacement? If you actually look at it the other way around, whenever roads have been built, roads are usually, the argument for building roads is very often because there's too much traffic and you want to move it somewhere else. And usually what happens when you build more roads is you just end up with more traffic. Yeah. So it's not unreasonable to believe that actually, if you reduce road surfaces, that actually what you get is, rather than displacement, you can actually you might actually just eliminate it. And it is a very controversial thing. It is a very difficult thing. And I know that some of the research done in London about low traffic neighborhoods, in some cases there's been some displacement. They've measured some, in some cases it's just evaporated. And so I don't know. I think it's really, I think it's a really important area of research, because I think we need to win the argument that we're not just swapping one problem for another. Yeah. Because obviously, if you do build, if you did make it sort of like, the Strand, if you completely pedestrianized or took traffic off it completely, what would happen? Well, I reckon an awful lot of that traffic around there is not people getting from north and south of the city centre. A lot of it is just people accessing those buildings and those roads off there, but we don't really know unless someone does the research. So I don't think it's cut and dried that if you were to do something very radical, that would just cause other problems somewhere else, because you might get people going, great, I can cycle to work now, with people who previously weren't able to do that. And public transport becomes more viable if the journey at the end of your journey, it's easier to walk where you want to go. So if you want to go to, say, you work in the council offices by the library, by the Cunard building or the Albert Dock or something like that, I mean, wouldn't it be much nicer to, and easier to walk to work from use public transport and then walk to work if you didn't have to cross what is virtually a motorway going through the city? And so I think it's the displacement issue is a really complicated one. And if there are, good quality simulations out there that you can sort of incorporate your design into, as was suggested, I think that would be, be great to get, to get some data out of that. I mean, whether it can predict, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. It's, you can make a design, but you've got to, you can't look at it in isolation. You've got to look at all the other effects, and it's quite difficult with just things like roads, because they're essential corridors, and it's going to have effects everywhere, pretty much. And I think with generally just urban planning in general, it's the built environment, so it affects everyone. So lots of people are going to have opinions about it. So of course, there's a huge weight on it.
Well, the current model that they use for when they look at decisions to widen roads or change junctions or whatever, doesn't actually, only looks at it's pretty much I would call it a static model effectively, because it doesn't look at the potential changes of modal shift at all. They don't look at the impact on that at all. In Merseyside, they don't. So any decisions that are made, the models they use are just purely based on the effect on traffic. So for instance, they're talking about widening Riverside Drive. Now, if you do that, there's the old Garden Festival site. There's going to be loads of houses there, and the nearest public transport is going to be St Michael's train station. That's the nearest station. So obviously, if you widen that road and send it to dual carriageway as they're proposing, that's going to dramatically reduce the amount of people who can walk to the station, who will walk to the station. But their models don't take that into account. But I know in Greater Manchester, they've now changed it so that if you actually any decisions about roads, their models have to take into account the impact this will have on pedestrians and things like that. So there's room for improvements, even even under existing models that are available.
Yeah. Well, that just seems quite depressing, actually, that they're using an incorrect, essentially an outdated model, because they're going to shoot themselves in the foot, really, aren't they? Because then we build this big road, but then you're going to have loads of traffic. And I know the Riverside that you talk about, the Garden Festival, you've got pretty much a traffic-free walking and cycling route into the centre, and St Michael's is fairly close. 10-15 minutes into the city centre by rail. So they've got a great opportunity for a more kind of transit-oriented kind of development. So it would be a shame for them to shift it to a car-oriented development.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed.
Just seeing the comment about the urban green up. That's not something I've thought about, but yeah, that might be a good idea for me, actually. Yeah, to get in contact with them.
I did a bit of work with them when I was doing some environmental impact assessment module near the beginning, the early days of my PhD. I'm not really sure where they progressed, but I'm presuming they have quite a lot of influence in the Liverpool City Council, because they were working quite closely with them. As always, when you're dealing with politicians and council and things, it's like always long-winded and things take longer than they're meant to. But there might be some really good context to try and kind of build up your influence and actually kind of leverage the projects that you have, and hopefully maybe even propose some of the changes that they haven't looked into yet. I'll just share a link in the chat of the cycle and pedestrian green routes, that the page that I was looking at, but maybe it's worth kind of following up with them and saying whether they considered the things that you've done and such.
All right, yeah. Yeah, thanks for that. I'll take a look at that later then.
No problem.
Right, anyone else got any other final questions before I guess we can finish up now?
Well, if not, let me thank our speaker again. We have these little emojis. I'll do my little emoji. There we go. I'm applauding you. Thanks very much. I thought it was a great talk, and I was very interested. And I'll send you some links by email. Congratulations.
Brilliant. Okay. Well,
Thanks.
thank you everyone once again for listening, taking the time. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Todd.